r/ask Reddit. What is the one story you want to tell that you can never fit into a conversation? I might have met Christopher Walken while working at a fast food restaurant. This guy walks and that looks really familiar. I thought that maybe he came in a few days ago or something and that's why he looked familiar. I take his order and I ask for a name to put on the order. He chuckles and says Chris. Why did he chuckle? I didn't know at the time. It wasn't until a few days later where it hit me that the guy looked like Christopher Walken. He said his name was Chris, and the reason he chuckled was probably because I didn't realize he was Christopher Walken. I got done with my bartending shift in a college town over a summer and headed over to my friend's house for after bar. Everything in this town was walking distance, and since it was summer it was fairly quiet night at around 4 AM as I'm walking home from the after bar by myself. Suddenly, a couple of guys come up behind me, completely wasted riding a tandem bike. These guys were barely keeping this thing on the street when a car drove by, slowed down, and a girl from the back window of the car leans out and flashes her tits at them. They guys crashed their tandem bike into a curb in a fantastically comical way, and the car sped off. I miss small college town life. In 3rd grade there was a girl I used to hang out with. She had a weird laugh. It sounded like a horse's neigh. One day she was very happy about something and kissed me. After that whenever I laughed it sounded like an A2. I ended up going to another school after that and lost that laugh. I live in Maine in the same town as Stephen King. I have worked at several stores when I was younger such as Home Depot and Walmart. He has come in sometimes. He recognized me when I worked at Home Depot from Walmart and said you really need to stop following me. Jokingly of course. He was a pretty cool dude. Bought some screws and lumber. I used to deliver pizzas. I roll up to this one house, waltz to the door, have a knock and start waiting, when this cicada starts dive bombing me, kamikaze style, with rage. Like I could almost hear it screaming at me. This went on for the several minutes that my customer wasn't answering the door, and then the cicada conveniently flew away right as the door popped open. So I'm sitting there stressed, kind of in shock with a pizza in my hand, and tell the customer what happened for some reason. They don't care. Whatever. I walk back to my car, get in, the cicada is in my car, attacks me again. One of the most surreal exchanges with nature I've yet encountered. When I was a kid I had this awesome Supersonics hoodie. It was my favorite piece of clothing I owned, and I wore it all the time. One Halloween, we were lighting off some fireworks. One kid shot a Roman candle at a light post, and it bounced off, came right back down, and landed in my hoodie pocket. Burnt a hole right down through the whole thing. I looked for a new one, but at that point the Sonics were gone. For those that don't know, Sonics were a Seattle NBA team that the Deutsche Bank Howard Schultz sold to out-of-towners for no reason. Fast forward many years, and I'm walking through a shopping outlet and see my old hoodie. I buy it on the spot of course. It felt like being reunited with an old friend. A little while later I'm out for a jog in the hoodie, and while running on a path a protruded tree branch sticking out catches my hoodie pocket and rips it straight through. Same exact pocket and even on the same exact side. I just don't even know. Went back to the outlet and of course the shop has shut down permanently. I got my sister to sew it up, but it doesn't have the same clean look it used to have. Once my wife and I were on one of those supermarket ramps that move like escalators, don't know the right word, and an employee was pushing empty carts in front of us. We were a few steps back, and the genius decided to ride in front of the carts, God knows why. 2 or 3 carts got loose and came rolling towards me and my wife, so I promptly jumped in front of her, saving her face from being hit by shopping carts. I never tell this story because it would look like I'm bragging, and she never tells this story because she's ungrateful. One time I was on the bus toward the back, but in front of the second door in the back. As we're going down the road I notice the guy in the seat across the aisle is sitting there jerking off. I mean, the whole thing was out, and he was going to town. There was a mom and her kids 2 seats in the front sideways facing seats, and I'm pretty sure he was looking at the kids. Just as I notice, the bus pulls up to a stop and the mom and her kids, who were probably around 7 to 5 years old range, get up to exit out the back doors. I bolt to my feet and block their way down the aisle and yell, "You need to go out the front door." The poor mom looks at me and starts to protest, but I just make myself big to block their way and start herding them to the front door. As she was exiting the bus, I tried to quietly tell her what was going on, but she was pretty mad at me and didn't let me get close enough to say anything. I think about this often. I was probably their villain of the day, and I actually might have saved them from real harm. In 2011, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It was 4 days before my 17th birthday. When I got home from the hospital that day, I wanted to put myself in a better mood. So I watched Rush Hour, and then I watched Rush Hour 2, and then Rush Hour 3. Fast forward to a couple months ago, I volunteered at a high profile event that had a shit ton of celebrities. We weren't allowed to fraternize with the celebs and ask for pictures and autographs and stuff, but there was one celeb that I needed to slightly break that rule for. At the end of the event, I made sure to be near the exit and wait there for Detective James Carter himself. I approached him, I shook his hand, and walked him out while explaining to him that Rush Hour got me through one of the worst days of my life so far, and it made me smile during a time that I had no business smiling in. He stopped dead in his tracks, looked at me, and thanked me for telling him. He then gave me a hug before sincerely wishing the best for me and leaving the event. And that's what happened when I met Chris Tucker. One time, me and my brother were being signed up by my parents to do a Rugrats Campbell soup commercial. My parents were both in chairs in front of this desk talking to a man, and I was sitting leaning against the wall by the door behind them. Then a hand comes through the door and clamps around my mouth, and I get dragged out of the room. He's dragging me down the hall, and I'm trying to kick and scream, but he's this 6'2" white guy with a long beard, and I can't budge or make a noise past his hand. Then halfway down the hallway in the lobby, the receptionist looks up at us and he lets me go. I run back to the room and sit on the floor between my parents' chairs. The guy comes in again and whispers something to the man my parents are talking to and leaves. It still makes me angry today because when I told them this story, they didn't believe me. I was 5. I'm 27 now, and now they believe me. It was so traumatizing, I still remember it. The time my 6'2" schizophrenic patient on a 72-hour psychiatric halt was pleading with me to run and get him a urinal jug because he couldn't make it to the bathroom. This was odd because he could walk just fine, but I like keeping the peace. I run to grab a new one and pop it open to help him place it quick. Got there just in time for him to come on my hand and wrist in the new urinal. The only time as a nurse I was truly caught off guard by an inappropriate sexual gesture to the point of full assault. I was raging inside and frozen in my response. Luckily, my amazing coworkers stepped in to take over while I went and sobbed in the locker rooms for a bit. In hindsight, it's the craziest, cruelest moment of my career, and yet because of the help I got, the sickness of that patient, and my dark sense of humor, I can now laugh at that fucked up moment in time. Not a great story to tell over drinks and dinner with friends, or ever, because fuck. A family friend was babysitting me and her grandson. He liked hunting, so he had tons of toy guns, and we were running around the house and shooting each other with them. I ducked into the bedroom with the door open and waited until I heard footsteps. I shot out of that room, guns blazing, complete with machine gun sound effects. The problem was that it wasn't the kid. I about gave that 60-year-old woman a heart attack. She swore and stormed off, but I couldn't stop laughing. I went to the Grand Canyon years ago with my parents. A couple of stops in, we get out at a lookout where there is only us and this biker couple. She was sitting on the edge of the canyon with something in her hand, and he was videotaping her. We had to walk past them to get to a trail that led into the canyon. It didn't take me and my dad long to see what the couple was doing, so we stopped and tried to give them space, but my mom kept walking. The woman dumped something into the canyon, and at the same time a wind blew out of the canyon and at my mom. The biker couple watched what they had dumped out fly into my mom's face. It turns out that it was the ashes of her brother, and his last request was to have his ashes spread at the Grand Canyon. What followed is the most awkward 10 minutes of my life as they talked to my mom about The Departed. At the end of the conversation the lady says, "Don't feel bad about it, he loved to meet new people." My mom responds, "Well, it was nice to meet you, and your brother as well." Okay, so when I was about 6 or so, I was in the ball pit at a McDonald's play place. The other kids and I were playing this game that involved grabbing whatever kid tried to escape the ball pit and throwing them back in. So this one kid tries to escape, and I grabbed his leg. He was an amputee, and I had grabbed his prosthetic. I was 6 and didn't know it was even possible to lose a limb. His prosthetic came off and suddenly I was holding this stranger kid's leg in my hands. I thought I had ripped his leg off. I screamed, I cried, I apologized, and I ran to my parents who had to explain the concept of an amputee to me in a McDonald's.